They said the way to a man's heart was through his stomach. For Matteo, it was the path to his new obsession. He came every night to that little tavern, for a taste of cooking that reminded him of a long-lost home. But he stayed because that beautiful chef was the only pure thing he wanted to dirty. The metallic tang of blood on silk was what Matteo Viteri hated most. It was a stain hard to remove, a needless reminder of the work he had just finished. He walked alone, having dismissed his bodyguards 2 blocks ago. He needed air, even if the Roman air in this narrow alley reeked of wet trash and piss. The cold drizzle wasn't enough to wash away the sticky feeling on his hands, the remnants of a failed negotiation with a traitor. Matteo's world was a fake one. 5-star restaurants with tiny bland portions. Women with stiff smiles that cost as much as their dresses. Respect bought with fear. Everything was bland. Everything was dead. He kicked an empty beer bottle, its clinking sound breaking the alley's silence. He was in a cold, cruel mood. Then he stopped. Something cut through the air. Something that shouldn't be here. It wasn't the smell of trash or cheap perfume. It was the scent of garlic, roasted rosemary, and strongest of all, the aroma of ragu that had simmered for hours. It was the scent of Sunday, a scent from a childhood he barely remembered. The scent was real. Instinct drove him. He followed the scent to a simple wooden door with peeling paint, tucked between dumpsters and moldy brick walls. A small faded plaque read, Trattoria di Vicolo. He pushed the door open. A small bell above it jingled, the sound ridiculous to his ears. Inside it was warm. There were only 6 tables. And there was the source of the aroma. Behind a small wooden bar counter, a woman was wiping a glass. Julia. She was simple. Her brown hair was tied back messily, and flour stains clung to her faded apron. She looked tired with faint dark circles under her eyes. But she wasn't broken. There was a grit in the way she scrubbed that glass. She looked up when Matteo entered, and the customer greeting smile on her face died instantly. She could see this man's aura, the wet, expensive suit, the cold eyes, and the dangerous tension in his shoulders. She was terrified. Matteo ignored her fear. He sat at the corner table in the darkest spot and took off his heavy coat. "We are closing soon, signore," Julia said softly, her voice trembling slightly. Matteo didn't even look at her. His eyes were fixed on the large pot still steaming gently on the stove in the small, open kitchen. "That smell," he growled, his voice hoarse. "Bring me that." Julia hesitated. But there was something in the man's voice that brooked no argument. Wordlessly, she went into the kitchen, took a large bowl and filled it with fresh pappardelle drenched in thick ragu. She placed it in front of Matteo. Matteo stared at the food. It wasn't fancy food. It was peasant food. He took a fork and tasted it. The explosion of flavor hit him. It was rich, honest, warm, and made without pretense. It tasted real. It didn't calm him. No, calm was for the weak. It piqued his interest, like a wolf that had been hunting in a dead concrete jungle and suddenly found something pure and alive in its territory. Slowly, Matteo's eyes lifted from the plate. Past the steaming bowl, his gaze locked onto the woman who had made it. Julia quickly looked away, pretending to clean the coffee machine. Matteo watched her, the way the apron tied around her slender waist, the way a few strands of hair escaped her tie. Matteo decided right there, right then, he didn't fall in love. Falling in love was another lie. He wanted her. He finished his meal in brutal silence. Every bite felt like a claim. He finished it all. He stood up, threw several euro notes onto the table, far more than the price of a bowl of pasta. Julia looked at the money, then looked at him in confusion. Matteo walked to the door. He paused, his hand on the doorknob. He looked back, staring at Julia one more time, a look that felt like a physical touch, a look that made Julia's skin prickle. Then he left, back into the cold night, leaving a trembling Julia inside the warmth of her trattoria. He returned the next night, and the night after that, it became a ritual. Matteo Viteri would arrive at 9 o'clock sharp, just as the busy dinner rush began to subside. He always sat at the same corner table, his table. He never brought friends or bodyguards. He came alone. The trattoria became his hunting ground. He didn't just eat. He observed Julia. He studied the way she moved in the cramped space of her kitchen. He noticed how the muscles in her shoulders tensed every time the doorbell jingled at 9, knowing it was him. He saw the way she tied her apron with a quick jerk, and the way she smiled wearily at elderly customers, a smile she never gave him. For Julia, Mateo's nightly arrival was a nerve-wracking torture. The man was her best and worst customer. He was quiet, he paid cash, but his presence made the air in the small trattoria feel heavy and dangerous. A week passed like that. Then, on a Tuesday night, the hunt escalated. It was pouring rain outside, flooding the alley. The trattoria was empty. Just the two of them. The sound of the heavy rain against the windows seemed to swallow the small eatery, isolating it from the outside world. Matteo ordered the pappardelle as usual. Julia's hands trembled slightly as she set down the hot plate. As she delivered the food, she leaned over slightly to place the dish on the table. Suddenly she felt it. Matteo's hand, which had been resting quietly in his lap, reached out and deliberately touched her backside. It wasn't a light brush. It was a firm, possessive, intentional grip. Julia froze. The hot porcelain plate nearly slipped from her hands. Her entire body tensed. A terrible chill ran down her spine, far colder than the rain outside. She felt violated and afraid. She wanted to scream, to slap his hand away, but her tongue was tied. She didn't dare scream. She lifted her head slowly, her terrified eyes meeting Matteo's. Matteo didn't break eye contact. A slow, sly smile curved his lips. He felt not an ounce of guilt. He held the touch a second, longer, emphasizing his point before slowly withdrawing his hand. He had just sent a message. I can. Julia took a step back, her face pale. Anything else, signore? Her voice was barely audible. Matteo leaned back in his chair, as if nothing had happened. He looked at Julia's hands, now gripping the empty tray tightly. Yes, he said, his voice low. Your hands were made for cooking, but they'd look better wearing the diamonds I give you. Julia always deflected. She didn't answer. She just swallowed hard. Enjoy your meal, signore, she said coldly, then quickly retreated, hiding behind the safety of her kitchen. She spent the rest of the night trembling, scrubbing dishes until her knuckles turned white, while Matteo ate his meal slowly, watching her. When Matteo left, he left 3 times the price of the meal. Julia stared at the pile of bills. She hated that money. It felt dirty, but the rent was overdue. She needed it. With shaking hands, she took it. This became their new game. Why bother with this small place? He asked another night, his eyes scanning the cramped room. I have kitchens bigger than this in my house. You could cook just for me. I like my trattoria, signore, Julia replied, not looking at him. Julia's refusal, her cold demeanor, her refusal to play along, was new to Matteo. He was used to women clinging to him out of fear or greed. He was sick of women who surrendered immediately. Julia's quiet resistance only fueled his obsession. To Matteo, nothing was unobtainable, and he had decided that this stubborn little chef was already his. She just didn't know it yet. The trattoria was nearly closing. Only 2 tables were occupied. Matteo, in his usual corner, sipped his strong espresso, his sharp eyes never leaving Julia as she cleaned the wooden tables. The other table, near the window, was occupied by an older man, a local tourist who had clearly had too much limoncello. He had been flirting with Julia all night, making her visibly uncomfortable with his sticky gaze. One for the road, Bella. The man slurred, his voice raspy as Julia came to collect his dirty plate. Sorry, signore, we are closing, Julia said politely, keeping her voice neutral, trying to maintain distance. Come on, the man chuckled. He stood up, swaying slightly. Just a little sweetness. His hand shot out quickly, aiming directly for Julia's backside, intending to touch her. Julia flinched back, her breath catching, but she wasn't fast enough. Swoosh, a shadow moved faster. Matteo caught the man's hand in midair, gripping his wrist just inches, before it could touch the fabric of Julia's apron. Matteo's grip was so tight that the sound of grinding bones could be heard. The man winced in pain. Matteo stood slowly, towering over the man. He didn't look at the man's face. He stared at the hand he had just caught with deadly disgust. What do you think you're touching? Matteo whispered, his voice as cold as winter ice, quiet enough that only the 3 of them could hear. You don't even have the right to look at her, let alone touch what isn't yours. Matteo was furious, not because the man was rude, but because the man was about to touch his property. The man, sobering up instantly, and terrified upon seeing Matteo's eyes, went pale. Sorry, I didn't mean to. Leave, Matteo said, still not releasing his grip. And if I see you in this alley again, you'll be eating without this hand for the rest of your life. He shoved the hand aside. The man, stammering, threw some euro notes on the table and scurried out of the trattoria, the doorbell jingling frantically. Silence. Julia felt a momentary relief. Her heart was pounding in her chest, but at least the man was gone. Someone had defended her. "Thank you, signore," she whispered, still shaken. But when she turned to look at her savior, she saw that Matteo wasn't calm. Matteo was still furious. His jaw was set, his breathing heavy, and he was staring at the recently closed door with a lingering, murderous glare. Julia, mistaking the anger for leftover adrenaline from the confrontation, felt the need to diffuse the tension. She couldn't bear anger in her trattoria. "Signore Matteo," she said softly, taking a hesitant step toward him. "It's okay. He's gone." Julia had to calm Matteo down. She did the only thing she knew to comfort someone. A gentle touch. Hesitantly, she raised her hand and stroked Matteo's broad chest, right over his expensive shirt. "See, I'm okay. It was a huge mistake." Matteo's eyes snapped from the door to Julia's face. The anger in his eyes didn't disappear. It transformed into something else. Something darker, hotter. Julia's naive touch had only aroused Matteo. He grabbed Julia's hand on his chest, his grip firm, locking her fingers. Julia gasped in surprise, trying to pull her hand back, but Matteo didn't let go. Slowly, he used that grip to pull her closer. "You see how dangerous it is out there, cara mia?" he whispered, his voice shifting from cold to low and seductive. "Here you spend your nights slaving away in a hot kitchen, when you could be in my warm bed." He pulled her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles, his eyes never leaving hers. "Just one night," he coaxed. "Give me one night, and you'll never have to worry about disgusting old men like that again. I'll protect you. I'll give you everything." He leaned in, about to kiss her, his eyes fixed on her lips with a burning intensity. In that moment, Julia regretted calming the man down. This wasn't protection. This was a transaction. She had just escaped one predator, only to realize she was soothing a far bigger one. "Signore, don't," Julia whispered, panicked. She tried to break free from Matteo's grip, twisting her wrist. She backed away slowly, but Matteo still held her hand, pulling her like a leash. Matteo stopped just inches from her lips. He saw the genuine fear in her eyes, and he smiled, the same sly smile as when he first touched her. He released her hand abruptly, as if he had won this round. Julia stumbled back, gasping for breath, cradling her wrist. Matteo returned to his table, picked up his coat, and threw several bills on the table, far more than usual. "Make sure the door is locked, Julia," he said casually, his tone light as if nothing had happened. "Out there are many wolves." The next day, Julia was different. She had built a wall around herself. At 9 o'clock sharp, Matteo walked in. He looked the same as always, cold, perfect, and dangerous. He walked to his corner table, but his eyes never left Julia. Julia took a deep breath in the kitchen, putting on her mask of professionalism. She walked out with a menu, trying to keep her distance. "Good evening, signore," she said flatly. Matteo didn't take the menu. He smirked, noticing the change in her demeanor. "You look so tense tonight, tesoro," he teased, his voice low and husky. "Did you dream of me last night?" Julia's face heated up, but she held her ground. "What would you like to order tonight?" "You know exactly what makes me hungry," Matteo replied, his eyes scanning her body briefly before returning to her face. "Bring me the usual." When she returned to deliver the pappardelle, she deliberately placed the plate on the edge of the table furthest from Matteo. Matteo chuckled softly. "Why so far away, he asked. "Afraid I'll bite?" "I promise. I only bite if asked." Julia ignored him and turned to leave, but Matteo's voice stopped her. "Wait." Julia paused, turning reluctantly. Matteo leaned back in his chair, looking at her with blatant appraisal. "Look at you, Julia. You're too beautiful for this dump. Your skin, your eyes, they should be seen under chandelier light, not these cheap fluorescent bulbs." Julia tightened her grip on the tray. "I like this place." Matteo scoffed softly. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a thick stack of cash, far more than usual. He placed it on the table with a soft thud. "Come with me tonight," he said. It wasn't a request. "Forget this soup and pasta. I'll take you somewhere where you won't have to lift a finger. This money, this is just the beginning. You could have 10 times this every night, just by sitting next to me and looking pretty." It was a tempting offer for anyone struggling financially. But to Julia, it sounded like her dignity was being bargained for. She stared at the money, then met Matteo's eyes. I'm not for sale, signore, she said coldly. Matteo's face hardened for a split second before returning to his terrifyingly calm mask. Everyone has a price, cara mia. We just haven't found yours yet. Giulia's hand jerked as she pulled the tray back. Enjoy your meal, she said quickly, half running back to the kitchen. Matteo ate in silence, but his eyes kept following Giulia. He enjoyed this cat-and-mouse game, but his patience was wearing thin. When Matteo finished, he left the stack of cash on the table. Giulia came to clear it, her hand hesitant as she reached for the money. Just as her fingers touched the bills, Matteo caught her wrist. You're so cold tonight, cara mia, he said softly, his thumb stroking the pulse on her wrist, which was beating fast with fear. I'm just working, signore Viteri, Giulia replied stiffly, trying to pull her hand back. Matteo didn't let go. Instead, he pulled her a little closer, forcing her to lean toward him. This cold attitude doesn't suit you, he whispered, his warm breath brushing her ear. But don't worry, I know exactly how to warm you up again. He released her hand abruptly. Giulia stumbled back, cradling her wrist, which still felt hot from Matteo's touch. Wordlessly, she turned and went into the kitchen. Matteo watched her go. A thin smile appeared on his lips, but his eyes were cold. Seduction hadn't worked. Money hadn't worked. Even fear hadn't made her submit. This little bird was stubborn. It was time to stop playing nice and start closing the cage door. Giulia arrived at the trattoria that morning with an uneasy feeling she couldn't explain. The Roman sky was overcast, heavy with the threat of rain, mirroring her mood. She inserted her key into the trattoria's door, but it wouldn't turn. She tried again, frowning, jammed. Looking for this? The familiar baritone voice made her jump. Giulia spun around. Matteo was standing there, leaning casually against the brick wall of the opposite alley. He wasn't wearing his full suit today, just a black silk shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing a watch that probably cost more than everything in Giulia's trattoria combined. In his hand, he twirled a shiny new silver key. Giulia's heart pounded. What are you doing? Why do you have the key to my trattoria? Matteo walked closer, his strides calm and commanding. He stopped right in front of Giulia, too close. Small correction, tesoro, he said, a thin smile playing on his lips. Key to your trattoria? Not anymore. Giulia stared at him in confusion. What do you mean? The old landlord, Mr. Rossi, wasn't it? Matteo feigned thought. Poor old man. He suddenly had an urgent desire to retire early to the countryside. He sold this building to me yesterday afternoon, for a very persuasive price. The blood drained from Giulia's face. Impossible. He never said he wanted to sell. Money can change a lot of plans, Giulia. You should know that, Matteo said, his eyes flicking briefly to Giulia's apron pocket, where she usually kept his tips. He inserted the new key into the door, turning it easily. Click. The door opened. Giulia felt her knees go weak. She stumbled back a step. This building, this trattoria, it was the only thing she had. Her parents' legacy, her sanctuary, and now it belonged to the wolf. Why? Giulia whispered, her voice hoarse. Matteo pushed the door wide open and gestured for her to enter, as if he were the gracious host. Why? He repeated as he followed Giulia into the dark trattoria. Because I don't like waiting, Giulia, and I don't like being refused. He walked around the tables, touching their surfaces as if inspecting his merchandise. From now on, he said, turning to face Giulia, you don't have to worry about rent, or electricity bills, or market thugs. I'll take care of everything. It sounded like a generous offer, but Giulia knew what it really was. It was a noose. What do you want? Giulia asked, though she already knew the answer. Matteo walked toward her, cornering her against the cash register counter. He placed both hands on either side of her body, caging her in. I already told you, he whispered, leaning down until their faces were level. I want you, and I always get what I want. He straightened up, slipping the new key into Giulia's apron pocket. His fingers deliberately brushed her waist through the thin fabric. Have a good day at work, cara mia. Remember who holds the roof over your head now. Giulia felt suffocated. Her trattoria, once a warm place full of memories, now felt cold. Every corner reminded her that she was no longer the owner here. She was just a tenant living at the mercy of a monster. She tried to find an outlet. The only bright spot in these bleak weeks was Paolo. Paolo was a young fisherman who supplied fresh fish for Giulia's Friday specials. He was cheerful, bright-eyed, and always had bad jokes that made Giulia smile. Paolo also clearly liked Julia, often lingering after deliveries just to chat. Today, Paolo arrived carrying a basket of fresh mussels. Ciao, bellissima, he greeted cheerfully, setting the basket down in the kitchen. Specially for you. The best mussels in the entire Mediterranean. I had to fight a giant octopus to get them. Julia laughed. It was her first genuine laugh in days. You watch too many movies, Paolo. They chatted for a while at the kitchen's back door, which opened onto a small alley. Paolo talked about his little sister who was just learning to walk. Julia listened, momentarily forgetting Matteo and her golden cage. Unbeknownst to them, at the dark end of the alley, a black sedan was parked. Its tinted window rolled down slightly. A pair of cold eyes watched the interaction. That evening, Matteo arrived as usual. But something was different. The air was heavier. He sat down but didn't order immediately. He stared at Julia with an intensity that made her skin crawl. Is the fish fresh today? He asked suddenly. Yes, signore, Julia replied, trying to stay calm. Paolo brought it this morning. Paolo, Matteo repeated. The name sounded foreign and dirty on his tongue. That noisy young fisherman? Julia felt a warning bell in her head. He's a good friend. Matteo gave a thin smile. A smile that didn't reach his eyes. What a shame. The next day was Friday. Julia waited for Paolo to arrive with her special fish order. 10 o'clock passed. 11 o'clock passed. Paolo was never late. Julia tried calling him. No answer. In the afternoon, an old customer who was also a fisherman came in for lunch. He looked grim. Did you hear the bad news, Julia? He asked. Julia's heart stopped. What news? Young Paolo's boat burned down at the harbor last night. Total loss. Lucky he wasn't on board, but that was his livelihood. Such a pity. Julia's world crumbled. She knew instantly. That night when Matteo arrived, Julia couldn't hold back. She marched to his table, her hands shaking with anger and fear. You did it, she accused in a whisper. Matteo didn't even look up from his menu. Did what, tesoro? Paolo's boat. You burned it! Matteo closed his menu slowly. He looked at Julia with terrifying calmness. Accidents can happen to anyone, Julia, especially in a busy harbor. Lots of flammable materials there. He didn't do anything wrong. Matteo stood up, towering over her. He leaned in, his voice low and dangerous. He made a fatal mistake, Julia. He touched what wasn't his. He made you smile. That smile. That belongs to me. He grabbed Julia's chin, forcing her to meet his eyes. Consider this your first lesson in ownership. You need to be more careful choosing your friends from now on. I don't like to share. A week after the incident with Paolo's boat, Julia lived like a ghost in her own trattoria. She barely spoke to anyone. Guilt gnawed at her every time she thought of Paolo, who had lost his livelihood just because he talked to her. Matteo had succeeded. She was now completely isolated. Tonight, Matteo arrived late. It was 10 o'clock, just as Julia had flipped the sign on the door to closed. The doorbell jingled. Julia turned, startled. Matteo walked in, followed by one of his bodyguards carrying a large, expensive-looking black box. We're closed, Julia said automatically, though she knew it was pointless. Matteo ignored her. He signaled his bodyguard to place the box on the nearest table, then dismissed him. We're not eating here tonight, Matteo said. Julia frowned. I'm tired. I want to rest. You will rest, Matteo said, after dinner with me, at my house. Julia's blood ran cold. His house. That meant entering his private territory, a place where she would have absolutely no control. I don't want to, she said firmly. Matteo walked over to the black box and opened the lid. Inside lay a folded blood-red silk evening gown, shimmering under the dim lights of the trattoria. On top of it rested a small velvet box, likely containing jewelry. Wear this, he commanded. His tone wasn't an invitation. It was an instruction. I said I don't want to, Julia repeated, her voice trembling slightly. Matteo looked at her. He didn't look angry, just bored with this pointless resistance. Julia, he said softly, walking toward her until she was cornered between the bar counter and the wall. We're past the phase where you have a choice. He tucked a strand of her hair behind her ear. His touch was cold. You remember Paolo, don't you? Your poor fisherman friend? Julia's breath hitched. I heard he's trying to find a new job at another dock. It would be such a shame if another accident happened. Maybe this time not to his boat, but to his legs. Very hard to work on a ship with broken legs, isn't it? Julia's eyes widened in horror. You're a monster. Matteo gave a thin smile. I am a man who wants something, and you, cara mia, are that something? He stepped back, giving her space. 10 minutes. The car is waiting out front. Don't make me wait, or Paolo will pay for it. Matteo turned and walked out of the trattoria without looking back, leaving Giulia alone with the black box that felt like a coffin for her freedom.